black kindergarten teacher disciplined a bad kid. His father, the Korean Mafia boss, asked her to do it again. The bell hadn't even finished ringing when she grabbed him by the arm. Not hard, not rough, but firm enough that every single person in that classroom froze. 7-year-old Jae-hyun wasn't crying. He wasn't apologizing. He was staring at her with eyes that looked like they had already seen things no child should ever see. And his lips curled into a smile that made the other kids scoot their chairs back. Ms. Diana Okafor had been teaching kindergarten for 6 years. She had dealt with tantrums. She had dealt with biting. She had dealt with kids who threw chairs and kids who screamed until their voices gave out. But she had never, not once, dealt with a child who smiled like that while being disciplined. She knelt down to his level, her voice low, steady, and direct. Jae-hyun, you do not get to push another child off their chair. Not today. Not ever. Do you understand me? He tilted his head. That smile didn't leave. My daddy says I can do whatever I want. The room went silent. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that overlooked the skyline like a throne overlooking a kingdom, a man in a black suit set down his phone and said to no one in particular, "So, she actually did it." His name was Choi Seo-gun, and he was not just any father. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling you in, hit that hype button right below the like button. It's the small arrow. One click. That's how you tell the algorithm you want more stories like this, and that's how this community keeps growing. Now, back to the story. Choi Seo-gun had not become the head of one of Korea's most ruthless criminal organizations by accident. He had built it, brick by brick, blood by blood. From the docks of Busan to the streets of Seoul, his name carried weight that made grown men lower their voices and businessmen cross the street. But here, in this city, in this life, he was trying to be something else. He was trying to be a father. It wasn't working. Jae-hyun was 7. He had his mother's face, soft, round, almost angelic when he was asleep. But when he was awake, when he was watching, there was something behind those eyes that didn't belong to a child, something inherited, something learned. Seo-gun had hired tutors. He had hired child psychologists. He had moved them to a quieter part of the city, enrolled Jae-hyun in a public school specifically because he wanted him around normal kids, normal teachers, normal life. He wanted his son to grow up in a world that didn't know his last name meant anything dangerous. But Jae-hyun was not cooperating. The boy had been through 3 schools in 2 years. The first school called it behavioral issues. The second school called it disruptive and potentially dangerous. The third school, this one, the kindergarten where Ms. Diana Okafor taught, was the last option before the district started talking about alternative placements. Seo-gun's assistant, a sharp-eyed man named Yoon, had briefed him on the situation that morning. The teacher disciplined him again today, sir, firmly, in front of the class. Seo-gun didn't react the way Yoon expected. He didn't get angry. He didn't threaten. He didn't make a call. He leaned back in his chair and asked one question. Did it work? Yoon hesitated. I'm not sure yet, sir. We're monitoring. Good. Keep watching. Diana Okafor had not planned on becoming a teacher. She had planned on becoming a lawyer. She had the grades, the scholarships, the drive. But somewhere during her second year of college, something shifted. A volunteer trip to a community center in a neighborhood not far from where she grew up. She saw kids there who reminded her of herself at that age. Hungry, angry, convinced the world had already decided what they were worth. She changed her major that same semester. Now, at 32, She ran her kindergarten classroom like a small, organized country. Every student had a role. Every rule was posted on the wall in bright letters. Every child knew exactly where the boundaries were, and exactly what happened when those boundaries were crossed. She was not a soft teacher. She was not the kind of teacher who let things slide because it was easier than confronting a problem. She believed, deeply, stubbornly, that children needed structure. That love without discipline wasn't love. It was just comfort. And Jae-hyun had tested every single one of her boundaries. The first week, he had thrown a crayon at another student's head. Diana had caught him, sat him down, and made him apologize. Genuinely, not the mumbled kind. He had done it. Slowly. Reluctantly. But he had done it. The second week, he had taken another child's lunch and eaten it in front of them, watching their face the entire time. Not because he was hungry, because he wanted to see what it felt like to make someone powerless. Diana had seen that look before. Not in a 7-year-old, in adults. In men who had learned, somewhere along the way, that control was the only thing that mattered. She had called the parent number on file. It went to voicemail, a generic recording, no name. She had left a message. No one called back. She had sent an email through the school's system. It bounced. She had asked the school administrator for an emergency parent-teacher conference. The administrator had looked uncomfortable and said, "The family has a complicated situation. Just do your best." Diana didn't like that answer, but she kept doing her job. The day Jae-hyun pushed the other child, a quiet boy named Marcus, off his chair, Diana didn't hesitate. She walked over. She grabbed Taehyun's arm, not roughly, but with intention. She knelt down. She looked him in the eyes and told him, clearly and without flinching, that what he had done was wrong, that it would not happen again, that he would apologize to Marcus, and that he would sit in the reading corner for the rest of the afternoon with no toys, no tablet, nothing but time to think about what he had done. Chaehyun stared at her. That smile, that unsettling, too knowing smile. "My daddy says I can do whatever I want." Diana did not blink. "Your daddy is not here. I am. And in my classroom, nobody does whatever they want. Not you, not anyone. Now, go apologize to Marcus." The smile flickered, just for a second. Something in his eyes shifted. Not defiance, but something closer to surprise, like someone had spoken to him in a language he hadn't heard before. He walked over to Marcus. He apologized. It was quiet. It was small. But it was real. Diana watched him sit in the reading corner. She watched him sit there for the entire afternoon, silent, his eyes moving around the room like he was studying everything, calculating, but sitting. That was the moment everything changed, though she didn't know it yet. Seo-gun received the report at 4:47 p.m. Yoon had placed a discreet camera in the hallway outside the classroom, not inside. Seo-gun had been very specific about that. He didn't want to invade the teacher's space. He just wanted to see what happened when his son walked in and out of that room. The footage showed Jae-hyun walking out of the classroom at the end of the day. No tantrum, no tears, no theatrics. He walked quietly, his backpack over one shoulder, and he looked smaller somehow. Not broken, just quieter. Seo-gun watched it 3 times. Then he picked up the phone and called Yoon. "I want to meet her." "The teacher, sir?" "Yes, but not at the school, not officially. Arrange something. Casual. I want to see what she's like outside of that classroom." Yoon paused. "Sir, if she finds out who you are..." "She won't. Not yet. Just set it up." Diana's routine after school was predictable. She graded papers at a small cafe 2 blocks from the school. The cafe was quiet, slightly worn, with mismatched chairs and coffee that was better than it looked. She sat in the same corner every day, her red pen moving across worksheets, occasionally sipping from a cup that had long gone cold. It was there, on a Thursday, that a man sat down at the table next to hers. He didn't look at her right away. He ordered coffee in English, careful, measured English, with an accent that suggested he spoke another language more comfortably. He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a few minutes, and then, casually, as if it were an accident, glanced over. "You're a teacher?" Diana looked up. The man was not what she expected. He was well dressed, not flashily, but precisely. Dark jacket, clean lines. His face was angular, serious, with eyes that carried a weight she couldn't immediately place. He looked like someone who was used to being in control of every room he entered, but here, in this cafe, he was deliberately making himself small. "I am," she said. "Kindergarten." "That's brave work." She almost smiled. Almost. "Some days it doesn't feel brave. Some days it feels like herding cats." He laughed. It was a real laugh. Short, unexpected, like it surprised even him. "I have a son," he said. "He's 7. He's difficult." Diana set her pen down. "Difficult how?" The man, Siogun, though she didn't know his name yet, considered the question carefully. "He doesn't listen. He pushes boundaries. He watches people like he's trying to figure out how to break them." Diana studied him. "That sounds like a kid who learned early that the world isn't safe. Kids like that test everyone around them to see who's going to stay." Something flickered across Siogun's face. Something that looked, for just a moment, like pain. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think that's exactly right." They talked for 40 minutes. He never gave his name. She never asked. But when she left, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The sense that she had been genuinely seen. Not as a teacher, not as a professional, as a person who understood something about the world that most people didn't want to look at. Siogun sat in the cafe for another hour after she left. He had expected a woman who was sharp, maybe cold, efficient. The kind of person who treated discipline like a transaction. You do this, I do that, we move on. Diana was not that. She was warm. Not in a soft, accommodating way. Warm in the way a fire is warm. It draws you in, but it can also burn you if you get too close. She spoke about children the way someone speaks about something they have chosen to fight for, not just something they do for a living. He understood, watching her, why his son had sat quietly in that reading corner for an entire afternoon. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even obedience. It was something rarer. It was respect. Jae-hyun had not respected anyone since his mother died. Jae-hyun's mother, her name was Yoon-hee, had died 14 months ago. It was not a dramatic death, no accident, no illness that dragged on for months. She simply wasn't there one morning. A blood vessel in her brain ruptured without warning. She was 31. She had been healthy. She had been laughing the night before, playing with Jae-hyun on the living room floor, building a tower out of wooden blocks and knocking it down and laughing again. So-gun had been in another city when it happened. He was always in another city when things happened. That was the nature of his work. That was the price. He had gotten back within hours. But Jae-hyun had already spent an entire morning alone with his mother's body, not understanding why she wouldn't wake up, shaking her shoulders, calling her name in a voice that grew louder and louder, until the neighbors heard and called someone. When So-gun arrived, Jae-hyun didn't cry. He didn't run to his father. He stood in the corner of the room, perfectly still, and looked at So-gun with an expression that no 7-year-old should be capable of producing. It was betrayal. Not because So-gun had done anything wrong, because he hadn't been there. Because the one person who had always been there, who had always made the world feel safe, was gone. And So-gun, with all his power, all his reach, all his ability to make anything happen in this world, could not bring her back. That was the moment Jae-hyun decided that the world was not safe. And if the world was not safe, then there was no reason to be careful, no reason to be kind, no reason to play by rules that didn't protect the people who mattered. So-gun knew this. He understood it the way only someone who had lost everything once before could understand it. He had been Jae-hyun once, young, broken, furious at a world that took without asking. The difference was, So-gun had channeled that fury into something dark, something powerful, something that gave him control over the chaos. He did not want that for his son. 2 weeks after the cafe encounter, So-gun made his move. He didn't contact Diana directly. He didn't call the school. Instead, he had Yoon arrange for an anonymous donation to the school. Not large enough to draw attention, but enough to fund a new reading corner and a set of new supplies for the kindergarten classroom. The donation came with one small note delivered to the principal's office. For the classroom that is doing the hardest work. Diana received the supplies on a Monday morning. She read the note, turned it over in her hands, and looked at the principal with a raised eyebrow. "Anonymous donor," the principal said, shrugging. "Happens sometimes. Just use the supplies." Diana looked at the note again. Something about the phrasing, something about the timing. She tucked it into her pocket and didn't say anything, but she thought about it. All day, she thought about it. Meanwhile, Jae-hyun was changing. It was subtle at first. He stopped pushing other kids, not dramatically, not with a sudden transformation. He just stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch inside him, and the impulse that had been driving him for months had been quietly, firmly turned off. He still watched. He still studied the other children with those calculating eyes, but the malice was fading, slowly, replaced by something that looked more like curiosity. Diana noticed. She tracked it carefully, the way she tracked all her students. She adjusted her approach, still firm, still direct, but she began giving Jae-hyun small responsibilities, handing out papers, choosing the book for story time. Small things that said, "I trust you, not because you've earned it, but because I believe you can." Jae-hyun responded to that in ways he hadn't responded to anything else. One afternoon, after the other children had gone home, he approached Diana's desk. She was packing up, and he stood there for a moment, silent, before speaking. "Miss Diana?" "Yes?" "The boy I pushed, Marcus." He paused. "I'm sorry. For real this time." Diana looked at him. His face was open, no smile, no calculation, just a kid who was trying very hard to say something true. "I know you are," she said, "and I know it wasn't easy to say that." He nodded, then he turned and walked out. Diana stood there for a long moment after he left, her chest tight with something she couldn't quite name. So-gun was watching from outside the school, not inside, never inside, but from a black car parked across the street with tinted windows. Yoon was driving. The camera footage from the hallway had shown enough, but Seo-gun wanted to see this himself. He watched Jae-hyun walk out of the school building, watched the way his son carried himself, still guarded, still watchful, but with something softer underneath. Like a layer of armor had been removed, and the skin beneath it was tender and new. He watched Diana follow a minute later, locking the classroom door behind her, and he watched the way his son glanced back at the building once, before climbing into the car that Yoon's associate was driving. Sogun said nothing for several minutes. Then, set up another meeting, the cafe again. But this time, I want to talk to her properly. Sir, what do you mean properly? I mean, I want to tell her who I am. Yoon turned to look at him. In all the years he had worked for Chae Seo-gun, he had never heard him suggest revealing his identity to someone outside the organization voluntarily. Not like this. Not to a kindergarten teacher. Are you sure, sir? Seo-gun didn't answer immediately. He was watching the street, watching the last traces of daylight hit the school building, and his expression was something Yoon had rarely seen on his face. It was hope. Yes, Seo-gun said. I'm sure. The second meeting happened on a Saturday. Diana almost didn't go. She had received a text from an unknown number, just an address and a time. No name, no explanation. Normally, she would have ignored it, but something about the number felt familiar, and something in the back of her mind connected it to the man at the cafe, to the anonymous donation, to the way her life had been quietly shifting in ways she couldn't quite track. She went. The address led to a small restaurant, not the kind of place she usually ate. Clean, quiet, with dark wood tables and soft lighting. A man was already seated at a corner table when she walked in. The same man from the cafe. Same jacket. Same careful posture. But this time, he wasn't pretending. He stood when he saw her, pulled out a chair, waited for her to sit. I owe you an explanation, he said. Diana studied him. You owe me a name first. He held her gaze. Then, slowly, he nodded. Choi So-gun. The name meant nothing to Diana. She didn't move in circles where that name carried weight. But something in the way he said it, the way he watched her face when he said it, waiting for a reaction, told her it was supposed to mean something. Should I know that name? She asked. In certain circles, yes. In yours, probably not. But I want you to know it now, because what I'm about to ask you requires honesty. And honesty starts with knowing who you're talking to. Diana leaned back. She was not a woman who was easily intimidated. She had grown up in neighborhoods where intimidation was a daily currency. She had learned, young, how to read a room, how to tell the difference between someone who was dangerous and someone who was merely pretentious. Seo-gun was the former. She could feel it in the way he held himself, the way his eyes moved, the way silence followed his words like an echo follows a sound. This was not a man who was used to being told no. But Diana had never been good at giving people what they expected. I'm listening, she said. Seo-gun told her everything. Not the details of his business, not the names, not the operations, not the things that would have made Diana's blood run cold if she had understood their full weight, but the truth of his life. The truth of his son's life, the loss of Yoon-hee, the 14 months of watching his son dissolve into something cold and broken. The tutors who failed, the psychologists who said the right words but couldn't reach him, the schools that gave up. And then Diana. You're the only person, Seo-gun said, his voice low and steady, who has made my son sit still, who has made him apologize and mean it, who has made him look at another child and see them as a person instead of something to be controlled. Diana listened without interrupting. Her face was unreadable, Not cold, but careful. She was processing everything he said, weighing it, turning it over. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you to keep doing what you're doing. Exactly what you're doing. The discipline, the structure, the honesty. I don't want you to treat him differently because of who I am. I don't want you to go easy on him. I want you to keep being exactly the person you already are." Diana looked at him, really looked at him, past the expensive jacket, past the controlled posture, past the weight of a name that meant something terrible in a world she didn't fully understand. She saw a father, desperate, hopeful, terrified of losing his son in a way that had nothing to do with death and everything to do with who the boy was becoming. She recognized that fear. She had seen it in her own parents, in her aunts, in every Black family she had ever known. The fear that the world would take your child and turn them into something you couldn't save. "Mr. Choi," she said, "I'm going to be straight with you. Please. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do. I care about what happens in my classroom. And in my classroom, your son is just another child who needs to learn how to be a person. If you can let me do that, without interference, without protection, without any of whatever it is you usually do to control things, then yes, I'll keep doing what I'm doing." Sogun nodded, slowly, deliberately. "I can do that." "Good. Then we have an understanding." She stood, paused, then turned back to him. "One more thing. The anonymous donation. That was you." It wasn't a question. Sogun didn't deny it. "It was thoughtful," she said. "But next time, put your name on it. I don't like not knowing who I'm dealing with." She left. Sogun sat at the table for a long time after, his coffee growing cold, staring at the empty chair across from him. Yoon, waiting by the door, leaned in. "Sir?" "She's extraordinary," Seogun said quietly. "Sir, she knows who you are now. This could be—" "I know what it could be. I don't care." The weeks that followed were the quietest of Jae-hyun's life since his mother died. He went to school every day. He sat in Diana's classroom. He followed the rules. Not perfectly, not without occasional slips, but consistently enough that the other teachers started noticing. The boy who had terrorized 2 previous classrooms was becoming something else, something quieter, something almost gentle. Diana watched this transformation with the kind of careful attention she gave to every student who was struggling. She didn't celebrate it prematurely. She knew how fragile these shifts could be, how a single bad day, a single moment of pain, could undo weeks of progress. So she kept going, kept being firm, kept being present, kept making Jae-hyun feel like he was seen, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who was worth believing in. And in the background, invisible and silent, Sogun watched. He watched through Yoon's reports, through the occasional footage from the hallway camera, through the small, careful updates that Diana began sending home, not to the phone number on file, but to a new one that Sogun had provided through a mutual contact at the school. Short messages. "Jae-hyun had a good day today. He helped another student with their coloring." Or, "Jae-hyun struggled this morning. Something upset him before school. We're working through it." Sogun read every single one. But the calm didn't last. It never does. The break came on a Tuesday in late October, when Jae-hyun arrived at school with bruises on his knuckles. Diana noticed immediately. She didn't make a scene. She simply, quietly, asked him to stay after class. When the other children had filed out, she sat down across from him and pointed to his hands. Talk to me." Jae-hyun looked at his knuckles. He flexed his fingers, studying the bruises like they belonged to someone else. "I hit someone," he said. "Who?" He hesitated. Then, "One of my dad's men. He said something about my mom." Diana's stomach dropped. Not because of the violence. She had dealt with violence before, in children and in adults. Because of what it meant. Because it meant that Jae-hyun was still living inside a world where his father's men were present, where his mother's memory was something people commented on, where the boundaries between his home life and his school life were not as clean as they should have been. "What did he say?" Diana asked. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. He said she was weak, that she died because she was weak. Diana reached across the table and took his hands, gently, carefully, holding them in hers. She looked at the bruises, and she looked at his face, and she felt something fierce and protective rise up in her chest. "Listen to me," she said. "Your mother was not weak. Do you hear me? A woman who raises a child alone, who builds a life, who laughs and plays and loves, that is not weakness. That is the strongest thing a person can do." Jae-hyun's eyes were bright, not with tears, with something harder, with the kind of anger that comes from grief that hasn't been allowed to heal. "He shouldn't have said that," Jae-hyun whispered. "No," Diana agreed. "He shouldn't have. And you have every right to be angry. But hitting someone, that's not how we honor your mom. That's not what she would want for you." The boy was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. Once. Small. Diana held his hands a moment longer, then let go. That evening, she called Seo-gun. The conversation was short and direct, the way Diana conducted all her important conversations. "One of your men said something to your son about his mother, something cruel, and your son responded with his fists." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Diana could feel it, the way the air changes before a storm. "Who?" Seo-gun's voice was flat, controlled, but underneath the control there was something dangerous. "I don't know, and I don't care who it was. What I care about is this. Your son is healing. Slowly, but he is healing. And the people around him need to understand that healing is fragile. If someone in your world keeps poking at the wound, everything we've built in that classroom is going to fall apart." Another silence. "I understand," Seo-gun said. "Good. Handle it." She hung up. Seo-gun handled it. The man who had spoken to Jae-hyun, a mid-level associate named Park, who had been with the organization for 3 years, was called into Seo-gun's office the next morning. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Park walked out with a different color in his face and a very clear understanding of what would happen if he ever spoke about Yoon-hee or about Jae-hyun again. To anyone. Seo-gun didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The people who worked for him knew that the quieter he got, the more dangerous he became. And today, he was very quiet. But the incident with Park opened something up in Seo-gun that he had been trying to keep sealed. He began to think about Diana differently. Not just as the woman who was helping his son. Not just as the teacher who had done what no one else could. But as someone who had looked at his life, at the chaos and the darkness and the violence that surrounded him, and had not flinched, had not run, had simply, calmly, told him what needed to be done and expected him to do it. No one had spoken to him like that in years, not since Yoon-hee. He began to find reasons to be near her, not intrusive. Seo-gun was too careful for that, and too aware of the boundaries Diana had set. But he started appearing at the cafe where she graded papers. He started leaving small things, not gifts exactly. A book left on a table with a note that said, "This reminded me of something you said." A coffee ordered for her before she arrived, paid for anonymously, but with a sticky note that said, "For the hardest work." Diana noticed every single one. She didn't say anything at first. She just let the evidence accumulate, the way a detective lets clues build before making an accusation. Then one afternoon, she found him sitting at her usual table, waiting. "You're not very subtle," she said, sitting down across from him. Seogun almost smiled. "I didn't think I was being subtle." "Then what are you being?" He considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things, with the full weight of his attention, as if the answer mattered more than anything else in the room. "Grateful," he said, "and trying to figure out how to show it without making you uncomfortable." Diana looked at him for a long time. The cafe was quiet around them. Somewhere behind the counter, the espresso machine hissed. "You want to know what would make me uncomfortable?" she said. "Tell me." "Pretending this is just about your son." The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Seogun didn't look away, didn't deflect, didn't retreat into the careful, controlled version of himself that he wore like armor in every other room he entered. He just nodded. "It's not just about my son," he said quietly. Diana held his gaze. Then she picked up her coffee and took a slow sip. "I know," she said. The next phase of Jae-hyun's healing was the hardest. It came in the form of a dream, or rather, a memory that resurfaced in the form of a dream, in which Jae-hyun began acting out in class. It happened on a Wednesday. The class was doing an art project, drawing their families. Most of the children drew stick figures, bright colors, houses with smoke coming out of chimneys, happy, simple pictures. Jae-hyun drew nothing. He sat at his desk with the paper in front of him, the crayon in his hand, and he didn't move. He didn't draw. He didn't look up. He just sat there, frozen, his breathing coming faster, his knuckles white around the crayon. Diana watched him from across the room. She didn't rush over. She didn't make a scene. She just waited, the way you wait for a storm to pass, present, attentive, ready to act but not forcing anything. After 10 minutes, Chae-hyun's hand began to shake. Diana moved then, quietly. She sat down next to him, not saying anything, just being there. Her presence, solid and calm, like an anchor in a rough sea. After another minute, Jae-hyun spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "I can't draw her." Diana didn't need to ask who he meant. "You don't have to draw her," she said gently. "You can draw whatever you want, or nothing at all. This is your paper." "But everyone else is drawing their family. Everyone else has a different family than you do, and that's okay. Your family is yours. You get to decide how to show it, or if you show it at all." Jae-hyun was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to draw. Not a stick figure, not a house. He drew a single flower, just one, with a long stem and petals that he colored in yellow, carefully, one stroke at a time. Diana watched him draw it, and she felt her heart crack open in a way that surprised her. This was not a child who was broken. This was a child who was reaching for something to hold on to and finding it, one small piece at a time. When the flower was finished, Jae-hyun looked at it. Then he looked at Diana. "That's for her," he said. Diana nodded. "It's beautiful, Jae-hyun. She would love it." He carefully cut it out with scissors and folded it into his backpack. Diana told Seogun about the flower that evening. They were at the restaurant, the same one where she had first learned his name. It had become their place without either of them explicitly saying so. Diana didn't love labels or declarations. She preferred the quiet accumulation of shared moments. Seogun listened to the story without interrupting. When Diana finished, he was silent for a long time. His hands wrapped around a glass of water, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the table. "He drew it for Yoon-hee," Seogun said. "Yes." "He never talks about her. Not to me, not to anyone." "He's not ready to talk about her yet. But he's not shutting her out anymore. That flower, that's him letting her back in. It's a good sign." Seogun nodded slowly. Then he looked up at Diana, and for the first time, she saw something in his face that was not guarded, not controlled, not calculated. It was raw, vulnerable. The face of a man who had spent years building walls around himself and was watching them come down one by one, pulled apart by a woman and a 7-year-old boy who refused to let him disappear behind them. "How do you do this?" he asked. "How do you see all of this pain, and not break?" Diana held his gaze steadily. "Because I see what's underneath the pain, and what's underneath is still alive, still reaching. That's what I hold on to." The relationship between Diana and Seogun deepened in the way that relationships between two guarded people deepen. Slowly, carefully, with constant checks and recalibrations. Seogun was not a man who had been in a relationship built on trust. His life had been built on the opposite, on suspicion, on leverage, on knowing more than the person across the table. Romance for him was not a concept he had ever fully explored. Yoon-hee had been an exception, a woman he had loved with a fierceness that terrified him, and losing her had confirmed every belief he had about the danger of letting someone in. Diana was dismantling those beliefs one conversation at a time. She didn't ask him to change. She didn't ask him to leave his life behind or become someone he wasn't. She simply demanded honesty. Every time they met, she asked direct questions and expected direct answers. She didn't flinch when the answers were ugly. She didn't look at him with pity or fear. She looked at him the way she looked at every child in her classroom, with the steady, unflinching belief that they were capable of being better than their worst moments. And Seogun, for the first time in his adult life, believed it too. But the world Seogun lived in did not care about his personal evolution. The threat came in early November, not from a rival organization, but from within his own. A man named Cho Dae-sik, one of Seogun's oldest associates, someone who had been with him since the early days, had begun to question Seogun's leadership. Not publicly, not openly, but in the quiet, poisonous way that dissent spreads in organizations built on fear, through whispered conversations, through subtle redirections of loyalty, through the slow erosion of trust. Dae-sik's complaint was simple. Seogun was distracted. He was spending time on things that didn't serve the organization. He was becoming soft. The word soft in Seogun's world was not a criticism. It was a death sentence. Yoon brought the intelligence to Seogun on a Friday evening, just before he was scheduled to meet Diana. "Dae-sik is moving," Yoon said. "Not against you directly, not yet. But he's consolidating support. 3 of the district leaders have met with him privately in the last 2 weeks." Seogun absorbed this without visible reaction. He had expected something like this. Not from Dae-sik specifically, but from someone. The life he led generated challengers the way a flame generated heat. It was inevitable. Does Diana know? Seo-gun asked. No, sir, and I'd recommend keeping it that way. Seo-gun considered this. Then he shook his head. No, I told her I would be honest. I'm going to tell her. Yoon's eyebrows rose. In his experience, men like Seo-gun compartmentalized, kept the different parts of their lives sealed from each other like rooms in a house with locked doors. The idea of voluntarily opening one of those doors was, in Yoon's world, unthinkable. Sir, with respect, this is dangerous? Yes, but so is lying to someone who can see through you. Diana listened to Seo-gun's account of the situation with the same focused attention she brought to every important conversation. She asked clarifying questions. She didn't dramatize or catastrophize. She simply gathered the facts and turned them over in her mind. When he finished, she was quiet for several minutes. So this man, Dae-sik, he thinks you're weak because you're paying attention to your son. Essentially, yes. And if he moves against you, it's not just your position that's at risk, it's Jae-hyun's safety. Seo-gun nodded. Yes. Diana leaned back in her chair. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she sometimes did when she was trying to see past the surface of a person to whatever was underneath. Then you handle it, she said, the way you handle everything in that world. You do what needs to be done. And if what needs to be done takes me away from this? He gestured between them, the table, the restaurant, the quiet space they had built together. Then it takes you away. Temporarily. But Seo-gun. She leaned forward. Her eyes were direct, unwavering. Don't you dare use this situation as an excuse to disappear. Not from your son, and not from me. You hear me? The firmness in her voice, the same firmness she used in her classroom, the same tone that had made Jae-hyun sit quietly in the reading corner, landed with its full weight. Seo-gun nodded. I hear you. The confrontation with Dae-sik happened 3 days later. It was not violent. Seo-gun had learned, long ago, that the most effective power moves were the ones that didn't require violence at all. He simply called a meeting. All the district leaders, all the key figures in the organization, and he laid everything on the table. He knew about Dae-sik's conversations. He knew about the private meetings. He knew exactly who had been involved and exactly what had been said. And then he did something that no one in that room expected. He told them why. He told them about Jae-hyun, about Yoon-hee, about the past 14 months of watching his son dissolve and the desperate, clawing effort to pull him back. He told them that yes, he had been distracted, that his attention had been divided, that for the first time in his career, something mattered more to him than the organization. The room was silent. Then Seo-gun looked directly at Dae-sik. You think I'm soft, he said. You're wrong. I'm not soft. I'm focused on something that actually matters. And anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to say so. Right now. To my face. No one spoke. Tae-sik held Seo-gun's gaze for a long, tense moment. Then he looked away. The meeting ended. Tae-sik did not challenge Seo-gun again. Not that week, not that month. The organization continued to function. The threat dissolved, not through violence, but through something rarer and more difficult to achieve in that world. Respect. Chae-hyun brought the yellow flower to school the following Monday. He had kept it in his backpack for weeks, carefully folded, and now he unfolded it and placed it on his desk during morning circle time. Diana noticed immediately, but she didn't draw attention to it. She let it sit there, a quiet presence among the other children's work. At the end of the day, Jae-hyun approached her desk again, the same way he had before, quiet and deliberate. Ms. Diana. Yes? He held out the flower. Can you put this on the wall? with the other drawings? Diana took it from him. She looked at it, the careful petals, the long stem, the way he had shaded the yellow so gently it almost glowed. "Are you sure?" she asked. "This is very personal, Jae-hun." He nodded. "I want people to see it. I want them to know she was here." Diana pinned the flower to the bulletin board, right in the center, where everyone could see it. She didn't add a name or an explanation, just the flower, bright and quiet, among the crayon houses and stick figure families. Jae-hun looked at it on the wall for a long time. Then he smiled. Not the cold, calculating smile from the beginning. A real smile. Small. Private. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who has just done something brave. That evening, Diana told Sogun about the flower on the wall. They were walking, not at the cafe, not at the restaurant, but on a quiet street near the school. The kind of walk that two people take when they want to be together without being anywhere in particular. Sogun listened to the story. When she finished, he stopped walking. Diana stopped too and looked at him. The streetlight above them cast a soft glow across his face, and for a moment, he looked younger than he was. Not the head of an empire, not the man who had made grown men tremble with a single word, but a father who had just learned that his son was beginning, slowly and painfully, to heal. "He put it on the wall," Sogun said. "For her." "Yes." Sogun closed his eyes. His jaw tightened. And for a moment, just a moment, Diana saw the grief underneath everything. The grief he carried every day. The grief that had been there since the morning he had come home to find his world shattered. The grief that he had buried so deep it had almost become invisible. Almost. Diana reached out and took his hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it. Firmly, steadily, the way she held everything she believed was worth holding on to. They stood there on the quiet street, the school dark and silent behind them, and the city moved around them like water around a stone. December came, and with it, the school's annual holiday show. Every kindergarten class put on a small performance, songs, skits, the kinds of productions that parents filmed on their phones and rewatched for years. Diana's class was performing a piece about the different ways families celebrate the holidays. Each child had a small part. Jae-hyun's part was simple. He was supposed to stand at the edge of the stage and hold a sign that said, "Family." Diana had given him this role deliberately, not because it was easy, but because it was meaningful. Because the word on the sign was one that Jae-hyun was still learning to understand. The night of the show, Diana arrived at the school an hour early to set up. The gymnasium was being transformed. Chairs arranged in rows, a small stage at the front, streamers and lights strung along the walls. She was adjusting the microphone when she looked up and saw So-gun standing at the back of the gymnasium. He was dressed simply, dark jacket, no tie. His hands were in his pockets. He looked, for once, like any other parent at a school event. Nervous, hopeful, slightly out of place. Diana smiled, a small, private smile that was just for him. He nodded back. Then he found a seat in the last row where he could see everything without being seen by anyone who mattered. The show began at 7. The children filed onto the stage in their costumes. Bright sweaters, paper snowflakes pinned to their clothes, the kind of earnest, chaotic energy that only kindergartners could produce. Parents laughed and clapped and recorded everything. Jae-hyun was at the edge of the stage, holding his sign. His face was serious. Not nervous exactly, but focused. Like he was taking this more seriously than anyone else in the room. The performance went the way these things always go, imperfectly, loudly, beautifully. Children forgot their lines. One boy dropped his tambourine. A girl sang the entire song a full beat behind everyone else. And then it was Jae-hyun's moment. The other children sang their verse, a simple song about families being different and that being okay. And then they turned to Jae-hyun, and he held up his sign. Family, it read. He held it up straight, steady, his eyes scanning the audience, not searching for anyone specific, just taking it all in. The parents, the teachers, the warm, bright room full of people who had come to watch their children do something small and important. And then his eyes found Sogun in the back row. The two of them looked at each other across the gymnasium. Father and son. A man who had built an empire on fear, and a boy who was learning, for the first time, that the world could be something other than a battlefield. Jae-hyun didn't smile. He just held the sign up a little higher, and Sogun, in the back row where no one was watching, pressed his hand against his mouth and closed his eyes. After the show, Diana found Sogun outside in the parking lot. The night air was cold and his breath came out in small white clouds. He did well, Sogun said. He did more than well. He was brave. Sogun looked at her. The gymnasium was emptying behind them. Families filing out, children running ahead of their parents, the ordinary magic of a school night dissolving into the ordinary chaos of bedtime. Diana. Yes? He hesitated. It was the first time she had ever seen him hesitate. Truly hesitate. Not the careful pauses he used as a negotiation tactic, but a genuine moment of uncertainty. Thank you, he said. For him, for what you've given him back. Diana studied his face in the parking lot light. She saw everything there. The gratitude, the grief, the something else that had been building between them for months, quiet and patient and real. You want to know what I think? She said. Always. I think you've been thanking me for weeks, and I think what you actually want to say is something different. Seogun looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she had known him, he let the last wall down. I think, he said slowly, that you are the most extraordinary person I have ever met. And I think that if you'll let me, I would like to spend a very long time proving that I deserve to be in your life. Diana didn't answer immediately. She let the words settle, let them exist in the cold night air between them, real and unguarded and honest in a way that Che Sogun had probably not been honest in years. Then she reached up and straightened his jacket collar, a small domestic gesture that said more than any words could. Then I suggest you start, she said, and he did. The months that followed were not without difficulty. Sogun's world did not disappear because he had found something worth living for outside of it. The organization continued. The threats continued. The weight of who he was and what he had built continued to press down on every aspect of his life. But something fundamental had shifted. Jae-hyun continued to heal. Not in a straight line. There were setbacks, bad days, mornings when he arrived at school with shadows under his eyes that told Diana he hadn't slept. But the trajectory was clear. The boy who had smiled while pushing another child off a chair was becoming someone else, someone quieter, someone who asked questions instead of demanding answers, someone who, one afternoon in January, sat down next to Marcus at lunch and asked him, genuinely, curiously, what his favorite color was. Diana watched this happen, and she felt something she had felt many times before in her career, but never quite this strongly. The deep, quiet satisfaction of watching a child find their way back to themselves. And Seo-gun watched Diana watch his son, and he felt something he had not felt since before Yoon-hee died. The sense that the world was not, after all, something to be conquered, It was something to be lived in. The yellow flower stayed on the bulletin board all winter. Children came and went. New drawings were added around it. Christmas trees, snowmen, Valentine's hearts. But the flower stayed, right in the center, bright and quiet and permanent. One morning in February, Diana arrived at school to find a new drawing pinned next to the flower. It was crude, clearly done by a young hand, with wobbly lines and colors that bled outside the borders. But it was unmistakable. 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing next to each other, and between them, a single yellow flower. Diana looked at it for a long time. Then she looked across the classroom, where Jae-hyun was unpacking his backpack, his face calm and open in the morning light. He caught her eye, nodded once, and smiled. That evening, Diana sat at her usual table in the cafe, her red pen in her hand, her papers spread out in front of her. The cafe was quiet. The coffee was warm. Outside, the city moved and breathed and continued to be exactly what it had always been: complicated, loud, indifferent to the small, important things happening inside it. Her phone buzzed, a text from So-gun. He drew something today. 2 people and a flower. Did you see it? Diana smiled. She typed back, I saw it. A pause, then. He's happy, Diana. For the first time since she died, he's actually happy. She looked at the phone for a moment. Then she typed, he's not the only one. She set the phone down and picked up her pen. Around her, the cafe hummed its quiet, ordinary hum. The espresso machine hissed. Someone laughed at a table near the door. And somewhere across the city, a man who had spent his entire life building walls around himself sat in a dark room and read those 4 words over and over again. He's not the only one. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the silence around him felt not like emptiness. It felt like peace. But peace, in Seo-gun's world, was always temporary. Because the thing about building an empire on fear is that fear never truly goes away. It just waits, patient, quiet, biding its time until the moment you let your guard down, until the moment you start to believe that you have finally outrun it. And Dae-sik, who had stepped back after the meeting, who had lowered his voice and played the loyal associate for months, Dae-sik had not stopped. He had simply gotten better at hiding. The intelligence came to Seo-gun on a Thursday night, delivered by a source deeper inside the organization than Yoon had access to. A single piece of information, precise and devastating. Dae-sik knew about Diana. Not just that she existed, not just that So-gun was involved with her. Dae-sik knew where she taught. He knew her name. He knew about Jae-hyun's progress in her classroom, and he was planning to use it. So-gun read the intelligence twice. Then he set it down on his desk and sat very still for a very long time. The threat was not to Diana directly. Dae-sik was not stupid enough to move against the woman So-gun cared about, not openly, not in a way that would provoke an immediate and devastating response. The threat was subtler than that. The threat was information. The threat was exposure. If the right people learned that the head of the organization was spending his time and his attention on a kindergarten teacher and her classroom, the narrative would be clear. So-gun had gone soft. So-gun had lost his edge. And in that world, that narrative was a weapon more dangerous than any blade. So-gun picked up his phone and called Diana. We need to talk, he said. They met at the restaurant, their place, the dark wood tables and the soft lighting that had become a sanctuary for conversations that mattered. Diana listened to everything. She did not interrupt. She did not react with fear or anger. She listened the way she always listened, with full attention, with the kind of steady calm that came from years of dealing with situations that frightened other people. When Sogun finished, she was quiet for a long time. "So this man is going to use me to undermine you," she said. "Yes. And the best way to stop that is to remove the vulnerability, which means—" He stopped. The words caught in his throat in a way that words never caught for Chae Seogun. "Which means cutting the connection between us, publicly, convincingly." Diana looked at him. "You want to pretend we don't know each other. I want to protect you, and I want to protect Jae-hyun, and the only way to do both of those things is to disappear." The word hung in the air between them. Seogun didn't deny it. Diana leaned back in her chair. She looked at him, at the man who had walked into her cafe months ago pretending to be nothing, who had become everything, who was now sitting across from her telling her that the world he lived in was going to take him back. "No," she said. Seogun blinked. "Diana." "No, you don't get to disappear. Not from me, not from your son. I told you that before, and I meant it. This isn't about what I want. It is about what you want. Because what you want is to run, to retreat into that world and close the door and pretend that none of this happened. And I understand why. It's easier. It's safer. It's what you know how to do." She leaned forward. Her eyes were fierce, the same fierce clarity that had made Jae-hyun sit in that reading corner, the same unshakable conviction that had turned a broken child back toward the light. "But I'm not going to let you do it. Not because I need you here, because you need to be here. Your son needs you to be here. And if you run now, if you hide behind that wall again, everything we have done, everything he has done, is going to fall apart. And this time, there won't be a teacher who can put it back together." Seogun stared at her. The restaurant was quiet around them. A waiter moved past their table, oblivious to the weight of what was happening. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Don't hide. Don't pretend. Do the opposite. Let them see." "See what?" "Everything. Let them see that you have something worth protecting. Let them see that you are not weak because you love your son and you care about the people in his life. Let them see that the man who built this empire is capable of something more than fear." She paused. Then she added, "And let them decide if they want to be part of that or not." The meeting Seogun called the following week was not like the one before. This time, he did not play defense. He did not address rumors or counter allegations. He stood in front of the people who ran his organization, and he told them the truth. Not the version of the truth he had carefully curated, but the real truth. All of it. He told them about Diana, about what she had done for Jae-hyun, about the relationship between them. He told them that his son was healing, that his life was changing, and that he had no intention of going back to the man he had been before. And then he looked at Dae-sik. "You have information about the people I care about," Sogun said. "You have been planning to use it against me. I want you to know that I know this, and I want you to know that it doesn't matter." Dae-sik's face was stone. "Because," Sogun continued, the only way that information is a weapon is if I'm ashamed of it, and I'm not. I'm proud of the woman who taught my son how to be a person again. I'm proud of my son, and I am telling every person in this room clearly and without ambiguity. If anyone moves against Diana Okafor, or against Jae-hyun, or against anything that matters to me, it will not be the end of my career. It will be the end of yours. The room was silent for a long time. Then, one by one, the district leaders nodded. Daesik did not nod, but he did not speak either. And when the meeting ended, he left the room without looking back, and he did not return to challenge Sogun again. Diana was waiting at the cafe when Sogun arrived that evening. She was in her usual spot, red pen in hand, papers spread across the table. But she wasn't grading. She was just sitting there, looking out the window at the street, and when he walked in, she looked up at him, and her expression was quiet and knowing. "How did it go?" she asked. Seogun sat down across from her. He was tired, the kind of tired that comes from doing something difficult and important, not the kind that comes from exhaustion. "I told them," he said, "everything." And they heard me. Diana nodded. She reached across the table and picked up his hand, the same way she had held Jae-hyun's hands that day in the classroom, steady and warm and without hesitation. "Good," she said. They sat like that for a while, hand in hand, the cafe quiet around them, the city continuing its endless, indifferent motion outside the window. Then Diana said, "He brought another drawing today." "What did he draw?" "A house, with 3 people in it." Seogun looked at her. He didn't need to ask what it meant. He could see it in her face. The quiet, fierce joy of someone who had just watched something impossible become real. 3 people, he repeated. 3 people, Diana confirmed. And the yellow flower in the garden. Jae-hyun never knew how close the world had come to swallowing him whole. He never knew about Daesik, or the threat, or the meeting where his father had stood in a room full of dangerous men and chosen, for the first time in his life, to be vulnerable instead of powerful. All he knew was this, that on the wall of his classroom, a yellow flower stayed pinned in the center of the bulletin board, bright and quiet and permanent. That next to it hung a drawing of 2 people and a flower, and then a drawing of a house with 3 people in it and a garden. That every morning, when he walked into Miss Diana's classroom, the room felt safe. Not because there was nothing dangerous in the world outside of it, but because inside those walls, someone believed in him enough to show him what safety actually looked like. And that was enough. For now, it was enough. Spring came to the city the way it always did, slowly, then all at once. The trees along the school street bloomed white and pink, and the children in Diana's classroom pressed their faces against the window and pointed and laughed at the petals falling like confetti. Jae-hyun stood at the window with the rest of them. He watched the petals fall, and his face was open and bright in the morning light. And Diana, watching him from her desk, felt something settle inside her chest. Something that felt like certainty. This child was going to be okay. 6:57. The spring settled into the city like a slow exhale. But Diana had learned, in 6 years of teaching and 32 years of living, that the quietest seasons were often the ones where the deepest things happened. Not the loud, dramatic moments that everyone remembered, the small ones. The ones that happened in the margins of ordinary days, when no one was watching, when the cameras were off and the guards were down. It was during one of those small moments that everything shifted again. It was a Friday afternoon. The other children had already been picked up, parents filing in and out, the usual end-of-week chaos of backpacks and forgotten jackets, and mothers calling names across the parking lot. Jae-hyun was the last one, the way he often was now. Not because no one was coming for him, because he liked to stay. He liked the quiet of the classroom after everyone else had left, the way the light came through the windows at a different angle, the way the room felt like it belonged to him alone. Diana was at her desk organizing papers when Jae-hyun walked up and stood in front of her with his hands behind his back. "Ms. Diana?" "Yes?" He brought his hands forward. In them was a folded piece of paper, not from class, not the usual construction paper or lined notebook sheets. This was plain white paper, like something torn from a printer, and it had been folded carefully, deliberately, into a small square. "This is for you," he said. Diana took it, unfolded it slowly. It was a letter, written in the careful, uneven handwriting of a 7-year-old who was still learning how letters were supposed to look. Some of the words were spelled wrong. Some of the sentences didn't quite connect the way adult sentences did, but the meaning was clear. "Dear Ms. Diana, you are the best teacher I ever had. Before you, I was very mad all the time. I didn't know why. Now I think I know why. Because no one told me it was okay to be sad. You told me. Thank you. My dad says you are special. I think he is right. I hope you stay here forever. Love, Jae-hyun." Diana read it twice. Then she looked up at Jae-hyun, who was watching her face with the same careful attention he brought to everything, studying her, reading her the way she had taught him to read other people. She folded the letter and held it against her chest. "Thank you, Jae-hyun," she said. Her voice was steady, but something behind it was not. "This is one of the most beautiful things anyone has ever given me." He nodded, satisfied. Then he picked up his backpack and walked toward the door. He stopped, turned back. "Miss Diana?" "Yes?" "My dad wants to know if you want to come to dinner this weekend, at his place. He said to ask you." Diana almost laughed. Almost. Because of course Sogun had sent his 7-year-old to deliver the invitation. Of course he had. "Tell your dad I'll think about it," she said. Jae-hyun considered this. Then, "He's going to ask me again on Monday if you said yes." "Then tell him I said yes." The boy smiled, that real smile, the one that had taken months to earn, and walked out into the afternoon sun. Diana sat at her desk for a long time after he left, the letter still in her hand, and she thought about the strange, winding path that had brought her here. From a college classroom where she had changed her major on impulse, from volunteer trips and community centers and years of watching children fight their way back from the edges, to this. To a boy with bruised knuckles and a yellow flower, and a father who had walked into her cafe pretending to be nobody and had become everything. She tucked the letter into the inside pocket of her jacket, close to her chest, and locked up the classroom. Sogun's place was not what Diana had expected. She had imagined something cold, something designed to intimidate. All sharp angles and expensive surfaces, the kind of space that said money and power without saying anything else. The penthouse she had heard about, the one that overlooked the city like a throne. Instead, she stood in the doorway of a modest apartment on a quiet street, and the first thing she saw was shoes. A pair of small sneakers by the door, kicked off carelessly. A jacket hanging from a hook that was too low, adjusted, she realized, so that Jae-hyun could reach it. The apartment was warm, Not decorated with the kind of precision that suggested a designer had been involved. It was lived in. Books on shelves, some in Korean, some in English. A child's drawing taped to the refrigerator with a magnet. A blanket thrown over the back of a couch in a way that suggested someone had been reading there recently and hadn't bothered to fold it. Diana looked at Seo-gun, who was watching her face with an expression that was almost nervous. "It's not the penthouse," he said. "I know. I moved out of there 6 months after Yoon-hee died. It felt..." He paused, searching for the word. "Wrong. To live somewhere that big when the person who made it feel full was gone." Diana nodded. She understood that. She understood it the way someone understands a truth they have felt in their own bones but have never heard spoken aloud. "It's perfect," she said, and she meant it. Dinner was simple. Seo-gun had cooked, not elaborately but well. Rice, a Korean stew that filled the apartment with a smell so rich and warm that Diana felt something unclench in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. Jae-hyun sat at the table between them, eating with the focused intensity that children bring to food they enjoy. He chattered, not the way he had chattered in the early weeks at school, when his words were weapons, but the way normal children chatter. About school, about a video he had watched, about a dream he'd had the night before where he had flown over the city and could see everything from above. Diana listened and responded and laughed at the right moments. And under the table, her foot brushed against Seo-gun's, and neither of them moved away. After dinner, Jae-hyun disappeared into his room to play, a small bedroom that Diana glimpsed through the open door, covered in the organized chaos of a child's life. Drawings on the walls, a pile of books, a stuffed animal that looked well-loved and slightly lopsided. Diana and Seo-gun sat on the couch with tea, the apartment quiet around them, and the conversation drifted from the surface to the depths the way it always did between them, gradually, naturally, like water finding its level. "He wrote me a letter today," Diana said. Seo-gun looked at her. "What did it say?" She told him, not the exact words, those were private, between her and Jae-hyun, but the meaning, the gratitude, the understanding, the small, extraordinary breakthrough of a child who had learned that being sad was not the same as being broken. Seo-gun listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He's never written anything like that before. To anyone." "I know." "You did that." Diana shook her head. "We did that. You and me and him. All of us." Seo-gun looked at her. Really looked. The way he did when he was trying to memorize something. Then he set down his tea and turned toward her, and the space between them on the couch closed, and the kiss, when it happened, was not the kind of kiss that starts things. It was the kind that confirms them, the kind that says, yes, this, here, now. Diana leaned into it, into him, and for a moment, the world outside, the organization, the threats, the weight of everything Choi So-gun carried, all of it fell away. There was only this room, this couch, this man, this quiet, unlikely life that had grown up between them like a flower pushing through concrete. But the world did not stay away for long. It came back in the form of a phone call, 3 days after the dinner, at 2:17 in the morning. Diana's phone rang. She was asleep, deeply, dreamlessly asleep, the kind of sleep that comes after weeks of finally feeling safe. She fumbled for the phone, squinting at the screen. So-gun's name. "Hello?" Her voice was rough with sleep. "Diana." His voice was not rough. It was flat. The kind of flat that she had learned over months of knowing him meant something was very wrong. "What happened?" A pause, then Daysik moved. Tonight, not against me. Diana was fully awake now. She sat up in bed, her heart beating hard but her mind sharp. Against who? Another pause, longer this time. Against Jaehyun. The words landed like a physical blow. Diana's hand tightened on the phone. What do you mean, against Jaehyun? Where is he? Where is my... She stopped herself, caught the possessive before it fully formed. But it was there. It was real. Jaehyun was hers now, in every way that mattered. He's safe, So-gun said quickly. He's with me. He's asleep. He doesn't know anything happened. Then what? Daysik sent men to the school. Tonight, after hours. They didn't touch anything. They didn't break anything. They just left something. Diana's blood went cold. Left what? Seo-gun was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something she had never heard in it before, something that sounded dangerously close to fear. A message, written on the door of your classroom, in red. Diana closed her eyes. She breathed in and out. The way she breathed when a child was having a meltdown and she needed to stay calm so they could too. What did it say? The teacher can't protect him forever. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Diana opened her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was exactly the way it sounded in her classroom. Steady, direct, unafraid. Okay, she said. Here's what's going to happen. Diana arrived at the school at 5:30 a.m., before dawn, before any other teacher, before the custodian had even unlocked the front doors. She had a key, she always carried one, had for years, and she let herself into the building and walked down the hallway to her classroom. The message was there, written in bright red marker, not paint, not blood, just marker, on the door. The words were large and deliberate, clearly meant to be seen, clearly meant to frighten. Diana looked at them for a long time. Then she pulled a cloth from her bag, dampened it with water from the bathroom sink down the hall, and wiped the door clean. It took 3 passes. The marker was stubborn, leaving faint pink traces that she scrubbed away until the door was bare and unmarked. When she was done, she stood back and looked at the clean door. Then she unlocked her classroom, walked inside, and turned on the lights. The yellow flower was still on the bulletin board. The drawings were still there, the house with 3 people, the garden, all of it. The room was exactly as she had left it the day before. Warm, safe, a place where children came to learn and grow and become themselves. Diana sat down at her desk and pulled out her phone. She called Seo-gun. It's clean, she said. The door is clean, and I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm listening. Daysik did this because he thinks it will scare me. He thinks if I'm frightened enough, I'll pull back. I'll stop teaching Jaehyun. I'll disappear from this situation. And then your son will be alone again, and you'll be back to square one. Diana, I'm not finished. I am not going anywhere. Not because I'm brave, not because I'm stupid, but because I have spent 6 years watching children fight their way back from the worst things this world does to them. And I am not going to let one man with a marker on a door undo what Jaehyun has built. Do you understand me? A long pause. I understand you, So-gun said quietly. Good. Now, what are you going to do about Daysik? What So-gun did about Daysik was not something Diana needed to know the details of. She had made that boundary clear early in their relationship. She did not want to understand the mechanics of his world. She did not want to know how he handled threats, how he maintained power, how the dark machinery of his organization functioned day to day. That was his world. She lived in hers. What she needed to know was this, that Jae-hyun was safe and that the threat was dealt with. Both of those things became true within 48 hours. Dae-shik disappeared from the organization. Not violently, or at least Diana chose not to ask how. He simply was no longer there. No longer in meetings, no longer sending messages. No longer a presence in Seo-gun's world or anyone else's. Seo-gun did not explain the details. Diana did not ask. What he did tell her, when they sat together that evening in his apartment with Jae-hyun asleep in the next room, was this. It's done. He won't bother any of us again. Diana nodded. She trusted him. Not blindly. She had never been a woman who trusted blindly, but based on evidence, based on months of watching this man do exactly what he said he would do, every single time. Good, she said. And then, because she was Diana, now let's talk about something else. What she wanted to talk about was Jae-hyun, not the threat, not Dae-sik, not the message on the door. Jae-hyun himself, the boy, the child who was growing and changing and becoming someone new, and who deserved to have that process take place without the shadow of his father's world falling across it. He needs to know, Diana said. Seo-gun looked at her. Know what? That you're trying. That you're doing all of this, all of it, for him. He needs to hear it from you, not from me, not from the way you arrange his life, from you, in words, to his face. Seo-gun was quiet for a long time. Diana could see the resistance in him, not the resistance of a man who disagreed, but the resistance of a man who was terrified. Terrified of being vulnerable in front of his son, terrified of saying the words out loud because saying them made them real. And making them real meant acknowledging how close he had come to losing Jae-hyun forever. I don't know how, Seo-gun said. And it was, Diana realized, the most honest thing he had ever said to her. I know, she said. And that's okay. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to do it. Seo-gun talked to Jae-hyun the next morning. Diana wasn't there for it. She had suggested they do it alone. Father and son, no one else. She had spent the previous evening helping Seo-gun think through what to say, not scripting it for him, but helping him find the words that were already there, buried under years of silence and control. Later, Seo-gun told her what happened. They had been sitting on the floor of Jae-hyun's room, not on the bed, not at a table, but on the floor, side by side, the way children sit when the world feels too big and they need to be close to the ground. Seo-gun had started with the truth, simple, direct, the way Diana had taught him. Jae-hyun, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen. The boy had looked at him, waiting. When your mother died, I wasn't there, and I have been sorry about that every single day since. Not just because I wasn't there for her, because I wasn't there for you. And after she was gone, I didn't know how to be there for you the way she was. So I tried other things. I tried tutors and therapists and new schools, and none of it worked. Because what you needed wasn't someone fixing you. You weren't broken. Jae-hyun had been very still, his eyes fixed on his father's face. What you needed, Seo-gun continued, was someone who would see you, who would see how angry you were and how sad you were, and who would say, that's okay. You're allowed to feel that, and you are going to be okay. He paused, swallowed. Ms. Diana did that. She saw you, and she believed in you when I didn't know how to. And I want you to know, I am trying. Every day I am trying to be the kind of father who sees you too. Jaehyun was quiet for a long time after that. Then he leaned sideways and rested his head against So-gun's shoulder. A small gesture, casual, the way children lean against the people they trust without thinking about it. I know, Dad, he said. And that was all he said. But it was enough. The rest of the school year passed in the way that good years pass, quietly, gently, with small moments of grace scattered through ordinary days like light through leaves. Jaehyun finished kindergarten. He walked across the small stage at the end-of-year ceremony and shook the principal's hand and smiled for the camera. And Diana stood at the side of the stage and watched him, and felt something enormous and bittersweet expand in her chest. He was moving on. To first grade, to a new classroom, a new teacher, a new chapter. But the foundation, the quiet, hard-won foundation of trust and self-worth and the knowledge that the world could be survived, that stayed. That went with him. After the ceremony, Jaehyun found Diana in the crowd. He walked up to her with his little graduation certificate rolled up in one hand and looked at her with those eyes, still watchful, still observant, but no longer calculating, just present, just alive. Ms. Diana? Yes, Jaehyun? Thank you for everything. Diana knelt down to his level, the same way she had on that very first day when she had grabbed his arm and told him he could not push another child off their chair. She looked at him, and she saw the boy he had been, and the boy he was becoming, and the man he might someday grow into, and she felt, with a certainty that was almost physical, that he was going to be okay. You're welcome, she said. But Jaehyun, I want you to know something. What? You did the hard work. I just showed you the door. You're the one who walked through it. He considered this. Then he nodded, satisfied, and ran off to find his father in the crowd. So-gun was waiting near the back, the way he always waited, slightly apart from the main group, watching everything. But today, he wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching Jaehyun run toward him, certificate in hand, face bright with the uncomplicated joy of a child who had just accomplished something. And when Jaehyun reached him and held up the certificate and said, "Dad, look!" So-gun did something Diana had never seen him do before. He picked his son up, lifted him right off the ground and held him tight, the way you hold someone when you are terrified of losing them and grateful beyond words that you haven't. Jaehyun laughed, the sound of it, bright and unguarded and real, carried across the gymnasium, and several parents smiled without knowing why. Diana watched from across the room. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her face soft, and watched the two of them, the man and the boy, hold each other in the middle of a crowded room, completely unashamed. That summer, Seo-gun asked Diana a question. They were at his apartment. Their apartment now, in a way, though Diana still kept her own place. They had not made any formal declarations or moved in together or done any of the things that other couples did. They had simply continued being in each other's lives, the way two people do when the connection between them is too real and too important to need a label. It was evening. Jaehyun was asleep. The apartment was quiet. Diana was reading on the couch, her legs tucked underneath her, and So-gun was sitting in the armchair across from her, watching her with an expression she had come to recognize, the one that meant he was about to say something that mattered. Diana. She looked up, set her book down. I want to ask you something. Okay? He leaned forward. His hands were clasped between his knees, a posture she had never seen him take before. It made him look younger, uncertain. I want Jae-hyun to know you as a permanent part of his life. Not just his teacher, not just someone I see, someone who is there, who stays. Diana studied him. She understood what he was asking, and she understood the weight behind it. For a man like So-gun, this was not a casual request. This was him handing over something precious and fragile and saying, I trust you with this. I trust you with everything. Are you asking me to be part of this family? She said, simply, directly. So-gun held her gaze. Yes. Diana was quiet for a moment, not because she was uncertain, because she wanted to give the answer the weight it deserved. Then yes, she said, I'll stay. Jae-hyun took the news with the same quiet thoughtfulness he brought to everything important. He sat on his bed, his legs crossed, his face serious, and listened while Seo-gun explained, carefully, gently, what this meant. That Diana was going to be around more, that she was going to be a part of their family, that this didn't replace his mother, and it never would, but that there was room in his heart, room in their life, for someone new to love. Jae-hyun listened to all of it. Then he looked at his father with an expression that was, somehow, both ancient and very young. Is this why you've been happier? He asked. Seo-gun blinked. What do you mean? You've been happier, for a while now, I noticed. He paused. Is it because of her? Seo-gun looked at his son, at this perceptive, extraordinary child who had been watching the adults around him his entire life, reading their faces, measuring their emotions with an accuracy that most grown-ups couldn't match. Yes, Seo-gun said. It's because of her, and because of you. Jae-hyun nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Good, he said. And then, with the kind of finality that only a 7-year-old could deliver, she's really good at making people feel better. I think that's important. The yellow flower stayed on the bulletin board until the end of the school year, when Diana carefully unpinned it and brought it home. She didn't throw it away. She didn't put it in a frame or place it somewhere precious. She pinned it to the refrigerator in Seo-gun's apartment, right next to Jae-hyun's other drawings, where it sat among the chaos of magnets and grocery lists and school schedules. One morning, Jae-hyun noticed it there. He stood in front of the refrigerator, looking at the flower, and Diana watched him from across the kitchen. That's the one I drew, he said. Not a question. Yes, I brought it home. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned to Diana with an expression that was half surprise, half something deeper. The dawning understanding that someone had valued something he made enough to keep it. Not in a classroom, not on a bulletin board, but here, in his home, where it could be seen every day. Mom would have liked it here, he said quietly. Diana walked over and stood beside him. She didn't put her arm around him. She had learned, over months of knowing this child, that physical affection was something he offered on his own terms, not something that could be imposed. She just stood there, next to him, looking at the flower on the refrigerator. I think she would have, Diana agreed. They stood like that for a moment. Then Jae-hyun turned and went to get his backpack for school, and Diana stood alone in the kitchen, looking at the yellow flower, and she felt, with a quiet, steady certainty, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. So-gun never fully left his world. Diana had never expected him to, and she had never asked him to. The organization continued to operate. The demands on his time, his attention, his presence continued. There were nights when he didn't come home until late, and mornings when he left before dawn, and days when Diana could see the weight of everything he carried pressing down on his shoulders like something physical. But the difference, the real, fundamental difference, was that he always came back. Not just to the apartment, to the life. To Diana and Jae-hyun and the quiet, ordinary mornings and the dinners at the kitchen table and the evenings on the couch where Jae-hyun read between them, and the three of them existed in a silence that was not empty, but full. He came back because he had chosen it, chosen them, chosen to be something other than what his world had made him. And Diana, who had spent her entire career teaching children that they were more than the worst thing that had ever happened to them, watched him make that choice every single day. And she understood, finally, that the lesson she taught in her classroom was not just for children. It was for everyone. The story of Chae So-gun and Diana Okafor and the boy with the yellow flower did not end cleanly. It did not end the way stories end in movies, with a single moment of resolution, a final kiss, a fade to black. It continued, the way real lives continue, with complications and setbacks and small victories and large uncertainties, with mornings that were hard and evenings that were easy, and days in between that were simply, beautifully ordinary. Jae-hyun started first grade. He was not a perfect student. He was still quiet, still watchful, still carrying the weight of what he had lost. But he was present. He was engaged. He raised his hand in class sometimes, and when he did, his answers surprised his new teacher with their depth and their honesty. Diana continued to teach kindergarten. She continued to be the kind of teacher who did not let children disappear into their pain, who showed up every single day with the same steady, fierce belief that every child in her classroom was worth fighting for. New students arrived. New challenges presented themselves. New yellow flowers appeared on bulletin boards drawn by children who were learning, in their own way, that it was okay to be sad, that it was okay to miss someone, that it was okay to keep going anyway. And Seo-gun, the man who had built an empire on fear and was slowly, carefully learning to build something else, continued to show up. At the kitchen table, at school events, at the cafe where it had all started, where he sometimes sat in the corner with a coffee and watched Diana grade papers and thought about how strange and unlikely and real this life had become. He had spent decades believing that the world was something to be controlled, something to be conquered, something that would take everything from you if you didn't take it first. Diana had shown him, not through words, not through arguments, but through the quiet, daily practice of her life, that there was another way. Not an easier way, not a safer way, but a way that left room for something other than fear, a way that left room for love. On the last day of summer, before the new school year began, So-gun took Jae-hyun to the park near their apartment. It was the kind of evening that felt like a gift. Warm, golden, the sky streaked with pink and orange in a way that made everything look softer than it was. They sat on a bench near the playground, watching the other children run and climb and shout. Jae-hyun was quiet, his legs swinging, his eyes tracking the movement around him with the same observant attention he had always had, but lighter now, curious instead of calculating. "Dad," he said after a while. "Yes?" "Do you think Ms. Diana is going to teach kindergarten forever?" Seo-gun considered the question. "I don't know. Why do you ask?" "Because I think she should. She's really good at it, and kids need someone like her." Seogun looked at his son, at this small, serious, extraordinary person who had almost been lost to the world and had been pulled back, inch by inch, by a woman with a red pen and an unshakable belief in what children were capable of becoming. "I think you're right," Seogun said. Jae-hyun nodded, satisfied. Then he hopped off the bench and ran toward the playground, his small figure disappearing into the golden light, and Seogun sat alone on the bench and watched him go, and felt something settle in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. It was not happiness exactly. It was something quieter than happiness, something more durable. It was the feeling of a man who had finally, after years of searching, found the thing worth staying alive for. Diana was waiting at the apartment when they got home. She was in the kitchen, cooking something that filled the hallway with a smell that made Jae-hyun stop in his tracks and turn to his father with wide eyes. "She's making jollof rice," he said, as if this were the most exciting news in the world. Seogun smiled. "I know." They walked in together, father and son, and Diana looked up from the stove and smiled at them, and Jae-hyun ran to her and said, "It smells amazing." And Diana laughed and said, "It better. I've been working on it all afternoon." And Seogun stood in the doorway and watched the two people he loved most in the world exist in the same space, easy and warm and real. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in the place where the old version of himself still lived, the version that had been built on fear and control and the belief that the world owed him nothing, that version grew a little quieter. Not silent, not gone, but quieter. And for now, that was enough. Part 2 is coming. If you want it, hit that hype button and drop Part 2 in the comments. The next chapter is going to change everything.